Garveyism in Jamaica of today. They can call him a national hero, but you go to the library, you don't find any books on Garvey. You don't find nothing in primary schools on Garvey. And the material in the Jamaican Institute on Garvey is deteriorating, and they haven't laminated the paper so they can save it. And there's no Garveyism in the Caribbean islands, and very little here right now. Why he was heard here is not because anybody got any better brain than anybody else, but because our crude slave master and our crude oppressor made us know one thing: we were not a part of the state and not wanted to be a part. We were brought here to labor, and once that was over, you're a surplus population. For in Jamaica, they had the illusion of being a part of the British Empire. You cannot sell a state to a people who think they've already got a state. It was a matter of a frame of mind. Many people took pride in being a part of that empire. And while many of us would have taken more pride in being part of the United States, but the United States let us know by putting up signs letting us know what we are not wanted. Even signs, black drinking water and white drinking water. And you figure that one out. They reminded us every day of our status in such a way they were killed in a concept of being such a true blue patriot, and yet we held out hope and fought in all of its wars. When someone asked me years ago whether I loved this country, I said immediately, and I didn't think it out too well, I hate what it is, I love what it promises to be. That was before I understood that the promise wasn't even made to me or my people. They weren't even talking about me when they announced the promise. But what I should have said is that you brought me here against my will, and I'll stay here against my will. And so far as I'm concerned, with the life that I have in me, I'm going to transform this nation to something better. Failing to do that, I have no compunction about trying to destroy it. The role of the writer, the teacher, the leader is to make a new society. And where he cannot make a new society, he has the bounding responsibility to wage endless war on the society that harass him. Faith has assigned this task to the thinker, the teacher, the preacher, the political activist. And to him, war is a natural way of life. War against depression, war against hunger, war against any form of deprivation of the human being. It's a way of life. It's a normal way of life. Fighting to improve the condition of people, fighting to give strength to people without it, fighting to give homes to people without a home. Because I remember Dr. Ben saying last night in a lecture we gave together, he was quoting someone else, but it was an excellent quote. Show me how you treat your women, and I will show you the condition of your nation. And I say that the measurement of a nation The measurement of a people's humanity is how well they treat the very old, the very young, and the life giver of all people, the women. I don't mean she must necessarily be pampered all the time, but she must be protected and respected all the time. Shall I start, Reverend?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Didn't hear
Thank you very much again. We're going to be talking about the Zulus and the struggle for Southern Africa. I did not use the word South Africa because I'm speaking about a broader dimension than just South Africa itself. The Zulus influence all Southern Africa, and the Zulus gave forth a warrior example that influenced all Africa. And the main target of those trying to downgrade African history is to downgrade that warrior group that gave to Africa and the world its greatest example of warfare, standing up and protecting those things that belong to them as against those things that the enemy was claiming. When we look at Africa picture, the picture of African manhood in the mass media, there is something wrong with the picture in general, more wrong with the television series, The Africans. If African people were alert, they would have assigned people to look at it and explain it, but they would not have assumed there was anything basically true in the film. Do you expect South Africa, who put up most of the money, to have anything true and complimentary about a people who fought to keep all Europeans out of Africa, especially the Boers, and whose war with the Zulus drained them to such an extent they could not establish the republic inside South Africa or Southern Africa that they wanted to establish? Once you check out who's doing something and the motivation for doing, you will know what to expect. The picture, the series of the downgrading of Zulu womanhood and manhood. And it came soon after another slick job, slicker than the Zulus, a series called The Africans. Now, if you knew African history, you could see the downgrading in The Africans. But The Africans was done by a master black hustler with great skill and one of the best informed Africans on the face of the earth who know better, who never lie without knowing he's a liar, who never lie until he knows that most of the audience will not know that he's a liar. He's a master con man and a master hustler. that has been in favor of the whites against the blacks for more than 25 years. He wrote the first anti-Nkrumah article called Kwame Nkrumah, the African Czar, Leninist Czar. I commissioned an African to answer him. In other words, as the African freedom explosion became a world issue, he was trying to water down the enthusiasm for it by writing an article saying that Nkrumah was a pawn of the Soviet Union. Now, this is the man that made the picture. Now, if you did your research work, you would understand the National Endowment endorsed the series at first, but in the interim, the administration changed and the National Endowment withdrew their name, but it couldn't withdraw the money because the money had been spent. Only $600,000 in the first place. It cost $7 million. He got Africans of note to be his consultant. I don't know what they consulted him about or what he consulted them about, because everything in the film did violence to everything they stood for. But there are some Africans who are hungry. One, I could understand his position. He's a marrying man and a divorcing man. He had 2 sets of alimonies to pay. He needed the money. So sometime you sell a piece of your soul, you think, and you walk through the world as though you got a whole soul, when one time if you sell a little piece of your soul, your whole body is polluted. Your whole body is less of a body just because you sold one little piece. So what I can do without that piece? You can't. You can't do without any piece. You have to have a whole soul or none at all. Because you got to have a whole character or none at all. You're either honest man or you're a liar. One or the other, and there's nothing in between. So, all right. Who backed the other party called 7 Million? Annenberg Trust of Philadelphia. Who are they? A Jewish real estate, a newspaper foundation. Why would they endorse that? Why would they put up the money? When you look at the picture, you can see what is happening. You can become an amateur prophet. Why would they endorse an African film? It said nothing of complimentary about Africans. Not really. He said something about African exploitation of the minerals in the 4th section. But every time he had something real good to say, he said it about Muslims in Africa. Algeria, he was just eloquent about that. Egypt, Muslim customs, the Muslim woman so moral, dressed up, then showed an African woman in a bathing suit. He was downgrading African people in behalf of Islam. And most Africans did not understand what he was doing. All right, now, I've been in trouble most of my life, so a little more ain't gonna kill me. I think this film was backed by a Jewish foundation because ultimately they're gonna make peace with the Arabs And you're going to see the Jews and the Arabs in the same political bed against us. We have no friends, no place. If you realize that, if you realize we have no friends, then you count yourself all over the world. You might be 1 billion people. Maybe you don't need any. Maybe you can manage without. And you shouldn't let that little item worry you. People make coalitions. People make alliances based on interests. And people have always made alliances at our expense and made alliances with us to benefit themselves and broke those alliances when it was no longer to their benefit to do so. All right, now let's go back to the Zulus, because when Mezeroy came to southern Africa, he missed the Zulu story altogether. He missed the South African story politically altogether. He told a few things here and there to give you the illusion that he favored the radicalism, the revolutionary warfare that's going on, the frontline states. And yet, while he gave you the illusion, in other places he said applied what needed to be done, all he did there was just to infer here and there to show you what a pitiful lot they're in. And when he showed black kids in the hospital, he showed the sickest ones he could find. He could focus the cameras on. And he did not show anything because Muslim men, including black men right here, some in the audience and some all over this country, Muslim men are generally chauvinistic, believing in the separation, physical separation of woman, and assigning women to a lesser task as human beings. And blacks are forever joining things without examining them. But if you're going to join something, you transform it. Join it and transform it into something that you want to use for your liberation. Everything you belong to, from a whist club to a fraternity to a church, should be an instrument of liberation, or stop wasting your time. I have never been able to explain, even partly, why anybody should belong to Jehovah's Witnesses. And what's this got to do with the Zulus? Maybe everything, maybe nothing. If the founder of Jehovah's Witnesses said that there's room in heaven for 250,000, well, there ain't no room for us. Ain't enough room for the white members. You know they're going to take precedent. So what are you doing hanging out over there? We want a big heaven where all of us can fit. Because we have used our emotion in a wrong way. We have not seen the best things about us, and we have let others emphasize the worst things about us. Now, there was another series by Basil Davison that was fairly good. It was fairly good, mainly because Basil Davidson focused on chronological history. I mean, step by step, the progression of history, and moved it on. His series can be used in a classroom because so many of us in a color trap, and we had to buy one of the series for use in the classroom. We would buy the Ali Mazaroi because he's alleged black, and Basil Davidson is alleged white. And that's what we would have gone wrong, because Basil Davidson's series is at least usable in the classroom. If he takes a piece of history, he runs it straight to its ultimate conclusion before he moves to the next one. Ali Mazaroi didn't stay on anything over 2 minutes. It's choppy, episodic, and it's not usable. And yet, technically, from the view of camera work and angles and technology, it was the finest series that's ever been done. From the point of view of content in history teaching, it was one of the worst. Now let's come back to the series, The Zulus, where so many things were wrong, technically, factually. The whole thing was at least 95% factually in error. The people didn't talk like Zulus. These were actors, and bad actors at that. The people didn't look like Zulus half of the time. And it seemed to choose women who, nearly all of the lead women were light to the point where Zulus are not. And they had words, they were saying words that Zulu women do not say. You had one scene where a sister looks at her brother, who's the future king, and she said, I would have a chance of being queen, and you're going to be the future king only because of what's between your legs. African women don't talk that way. Clinical descriptions of sex belong in a medical book. You just don't go around talking about clinical descriptions of sex. It's a highly personal, confidential thing between a man and a woman. Group sex is as bogus as group therapy. But the dogs on the street don't think so, because they are dogs and you're human. You're supposed to think so. It's a personal and sacred thing to human beings, and it is a matter of maneuver and negotiation and conviction and convincing between two human beings. And even if it fails, you don't go out and publicize. It still remains a confidential matter between two human beings and not for the community. You give it that dignity, and Africans gave it that dignity. And they didn't shout about it in this way. Now, when we look at the people that we call Zulus, who are these people? Because the mass media is out to control image. They're out to, if they control what you look at, they can control what you think. If they control what you think about yourself, they can control what you do about yourself. Now, if they give you an example of the Zulus that's bogus, you will forget that the greatest military force against the whites, who fought them longest with greater degree of consistency, and had more victories than anyone in Africa were the Zulus. A war has been declared against us. And this war started in the 15th and the 16th century, and that war is still going on, only now it is more sophisticated. This is the war against our manhood and our womanhood. Now, the war, all this exposure and this fake pity for the black family is part of the same war. The black family is in trouble, no more or less than any other family in the Western world. Western civilization is in decay because it is not civil. It is not a civilization at all. We are in trouble because that civilization, that mechanism never fit our temperament as a people. It's like a body rejecting a transplanted heart that simply won't go with the body. We are rejecting the container that they put us into. Now, when I gave a lecture on the historical origin of teenage pregnancy and didn't blame the black men, the black women fraternities who invited me got angry. I said, there was no teenage pregnancy in Africa. There was no African man calling women bitches. There were no broken homes in Africa. Now, who is this black man who's breaking homes, signing children that he don't support, and slapping women around for reminding him of his responsibility? Who is he? Who created him? Western oppression and Western environment. That don't mean he is right at all. That don't mean he need to be excused. If he had revolutionary fervor, he would have revolted against the conditioning and been a man in spite of it. That I would be and do what a man's supposed to do, no matter what kind of oppression you place on me, because that is what I am. I am the shoulder of responsibility. When you touch a woman romantically and physically, when you have the privilege of sharing the sacredness of her personal favor, the two of you are about to change the world. That's no small thing to think about. That's a monumental thing. So both of you have to understand the consequences of doing it, or have the strength not to do it. But you have been programmed into a society where walking away from this sacred responsibility becomes a casual thing. What the women did not like, that I pointed out that the rape of black teenagers along the shores of Africa, in the slave castles, on the boats, on the plantation, was the beginning of widespread black teenage pregnancy. I also pointed out that there are 3 million people in the world called Eurasians, half Asian, half white. There's not 10 marriages between whites and Eurasians. In South Africa, there's over 1 million people called coloreds. That means cohabitation between the African man, the white man, and the African woman. And then there's another, almost 1 million, called Cape coloreds, cohabitation between the Asian, Cape Malayans, and all these people who came in later, and the whites. There's not one marriage between them. Now, who is the greatest deserter of women in the whole world? Now, I'm not trying to justify a single black man who deserted any black woman. And I'm saying that every single one should be called to his responsibility and made to shoulder his responsibility. But look at the historical origins of how this thing started, with the remaking of his mind, with the remaking of the condition where he had no security, where he must rise each day and literally beg for the right to live to the end of the day, where he does not inherit a job normally, he doesn't get his bread normally. He literally engaged in a form of protracted begging. And your begging for one day don't carry over to the next day. The next day, another form of begging, form of asking for permission to live to the end of the next day. And the next day it starts all over again. Look at what it is doing to his spirit. Look what it is doing to his very soul, the very dignity. Then he goes on the weekend and worships a white god. And in the rest of the week, you expect the father, black father in the home, to have full respect. When you worship, you're worshiping the oppressor, the symbol of the oppressor. Now, what the Zulu people tried to do is to preserve the concept of African sovereignty, the African nation state. Now, the Zulus did not start in South Africa or Southern Africa. Nearly every African in Africa came from another part of Africa. And the one thing we need to study in order to understand any portion of Africa are the migrations within Africa. The Zulus once lived along the coast of Southern Africa, of Eastern Africa, before they were called Zulus. It was a group called the Ngunu. There's an Ngunu group inside of the Zulus to this day. We meet these groups in a book by an Arab writer. The book's called Gems of Travel and Meadows of Gold or something. I'll remember his name in a few minutes. But the book was written 947 AD, over 1,000 years ago. And he encountered that group. They were living in East Africa then. But I'll tell you something about certain African groups, not just the Zulu. The Kan has the same trait. The Musi has the same trait. Anytime they are faced with a force they can't deal with, they pack up and move some other place. Can't fight it, get out of the way. Here's a group come now antagonistic, want to bother with your land, want to bother with your cattle, want to bother with your money, with your women. All right, let's go find another home. Africa's so big, you know, you can walk 10 miles away and find another country. Ain't nobody a country that's free for you to take if you want to, because ain't nobody there. The Zulus, when Islam hit that coast, began to move inland. Then they moved inland until they moved into the Congo Basin. Now the Congo Basin got crowded with other groups moving out of the way of Islam. See, everybody trying to purify Islam quite forget the damage it did. People trying to move out of the way of the Islamic slave trade. People tried to move out of the way of warring groups, and they were not a part of either part of the war, and they don't want to be caught in the crossfire. They just pick up and go. The African is a natural nomad. That don't mean he didn't build cities, but he'll move in a minute, you know, and go build a city some other place. So now the Zulus moved inland, and when the inland became crowded with herds and people with their flocks and cattle and sheep and goats, not for war purposes, not for any disagreement with anybody, they were living with a magnificent people, the people of the Congo, the Bashongo people, one of the finest people in all of Congo, the Bashongo or the Kuba people. The Kuba people didn't say go. Nobody said go. They didn't see the space they needed. So they wanted more space, and they began to move. Not only the Zulus, but other groups began to move down into the open landmass further to the south. The group with the prefix Ama to their name moved closer to the coast. And then the Zulus were referred to as Ama-Zulu, follower of Zulu. Their first great leader was named Zulu. They took his name. The other groups with the prefix Ba to their name, we can find these groups still there. The Bamangweta, Bamwakatsis, the Borolongs, they veered inland. Now the home of the great B group is now Botswana. There was a group called Botswanas, that's the third wave of the B group. The Borolongs went further into Central Africa. Later they would have a good relationship with they would join the Zulus, many of them as officers in the Zulu army. All right, now they settled. The Zulus settling along the coast around Natal, the coastal part of southern Africa. Further to the south, in the tip of South Africa, near the Cape, it's another people that had been there all along. They'd been there so long, no one could remember, and they're not too clear on it. These are people called the Koshon. Koshon San people. If you meet them, you say, what's your name? He says, Koshon. If you talk about his language, he says, Koshon, Koshon. If you're talking about the two of them, they say, Koshon Sen, S-E-N, Koshon Sen. If you're talking to a Sen, he says, San Koshon. Like two vaudevillians arguing over a building. Who gets the first name on the marquee? But if you talk to a Koshon, he said that they are the seniors, the Sen people are the juniors. Talk to Sen, he said that he's the senior, the Koshons are the juniors. Now this don't start any fight, but some of the best jokes you've ever heard between them is about who's the senior and who's the junior. See, good-natured kidding that white people make fights out of, the Africans make good jokes out of and good relationships out of. You even dance around and fall out with laughter, arguing over something. Nobody resolved anything. They don't intend to resolve it because that means the argument is over and there's no more fun. They want to come back the next day and argue some more. So arguing become a marathon thing that you do. It's not like Dr. Ben and I arguing over dynasties. Or who paid the last dinner bill? I treated you the last time. It's my turn now. You treated me. My turn. It was nonsense. But we enjoy it. We ain't gonna ever settle it. We don't want to settle it. He knows that I know that the 18th dynasty was the greatest dynasty ever to sit on any throne in any time in the history of the world. And I know that he thinks that the 19th is the one. But I'm never going to concede to him. He's never going to concede to me. And we're not going to lose friends. We're not going to lose friendship over it. Because it's part of both of our culture. It's to choose a subject that has no end, because we won't let it end. Another branch of the Zulus took over. Nearly everybody who became imperial in the world, this is true across the board, was once colonized by someone else. And that's where they got the idea of dominating others, because they were once dominated. The British were once a colony. All right. And so once they freed themselves from being a colony and remembered being a colony, they decided to colonize. All right, now, a group called the Mtiwa took over with the colonial masters of the Zulus. The father, the Zulu king, who's going to become Clarke's father, headed the regular Zulu group, while another king, Jobe, headed the dominant group. Ninda, who is going to be Clarke's mother, came out of the dominant group. In other words, she had a higher royal status than the man she married. The dialogue between them was a disgrace. Zulu dialogue, Zulu courtship is just something else. I mean, they sing praise songs to a woman, and they hire a poet to compose poetry and stand in her path and recite it to her. While you stand aside, see what impression it makes on her. I mean, the courtship is an elaborate thing. All of this before you consult her family, the two families consult themselves to see if there's a possibility of you getting together. All of this, you ain't touched her. You create an elaborate ceremony, around her. Well, anyway, Clarke's father met this lady from the dominant house, and negotiation began for them coming together. Negotiation between the two respective families. Finally, it was agreed that she would join this other house. The house that she joined was the house her people dominated. She came from the Mtiwa group, then the colonial masters of the Zulus. Everything went well until the marriage and months passed, and the other three wives had given birth to girls, and she gave birth to a son, Clarke, automatically making her the favorite wife. She had produced the warrior to carry on the tradition. The other wives grew jealous and began to tabulate the months between the marriage and the birth of the son. They assumed or said or proved or insinuated that the child had arrived too early, that there must have been some kind of relationship before the marriage, which is against custom, because the wives or future wives of Zulu kings supposed to be certified virgins. How you certify a thing like this, I don't know, but they're supposed to come to the king untouched in that regard. Now the gossipy wives started out on Nida, spreading rumors. Subsequently, they told the king, if you don't get rid of her, we will tell King Jobe, and he will rule you out of lineage and rule her out of the royal line. She now goes back to her people with her son. Now this is what the movie got wrong. The two, with the children kidding him and kidding her for not having a man. Africans don't do this. Illegitimacy, first what his mother and father was married. What's illegitimate? How did that get in there any place? Here John Gunther in his book Inside Africa said he was in he was illegitimate. Illegitimate how? His mother and father were married. His father acknowledged that was his son. The mother acknowledged that was the father was the father. So what's illegitimate? On the main thing, Africans don't even use the word. The whole concept of illegitimacy is unknown in Africa. Then, as he grew up, when she came back to Zululand, one of the other wives, two of the other wives had given birth to sons. Two of those two sons would someday be his assassins. His two half-brothers, Dingang, and the other half-brother. Now she leaves, goes back to her people, where Chaka grows to early manhood. She seeks friends for him. And when he refused to fight, she tells him and explains to him that there's no other way to survive except fighting. In the film, when the boys kid him and throw him in the water, then she tells him in the future he'll never leave his enemies behind. All the South Africans are trying to say is that if Africans come to power, they're going to kill all of us. That's all they're trying to say. Chaka left many enemies behind, so long as they realized that he was the boss of Southern Africa. All right, Chaka grew up. His mother sought friendships for him. His father did not see him again until he was 14 years old. Now all of this was left out of the film. This is a beautiful thing, ceremony. And when his father saw him, his father came to dress him for the ceremony of manhood. The ceremony of manhood is when the boy goes out into the bush, kills an animal, and brings back the mane. He has one spear, one shield. So that means he had nothing to practice on. He must find the heart of that animal the first shot, and he cannot afford to miss. And when he comes back, he is declared a man. He had to go to the hunting ground, was 3 days away. He came back in 6 days, so that means he must have found his animal the first day. Came back with the proof. Now he's growing up. His mother is seeking the friendship of the son of the king, Jobe. This son is called Ding Iswayo, the wanderer. Ding Iswayo befriended Chaka, but after an argument with the father, he goes and lives among the coast and lives among the whites. He noticed something when the whites are fighting among themselves. They keep running at each other in a straight line, and they get killed quicker that way. Ding Iswayo comes back to Zulu land, revolutionized Zulu warfare, and introduced a concept of warfare that still exists, broken field running. If you're running a zigzag line and someone's shooting at you, that cuts down on their chances of hitting you. That doesn't mean you won't be hit, but you're reducing the odds. Now it's in the infantry of the world. If you're moving forward on a battlefield, don't move in a straight line. He introduced broken field running. He revolutionizes the Zulu weapon, the assegai. He saw that the Zulu throwing weapon was too unwieldy. He revolutionized the shield. He makes a shield with matted with wax. So if you would throw a spear dead at the shield, it would glide off instead of penetrate. Now Chaka and Ding Iswayo is revolutionizing warfare in southern Africa. Then Chaka tells the Zulus, take off your shoes, it's making too much noise. The Zulu would move on a city and a group, and so silently, you don't know they're there. Then they would stand up and begin to bang the weapon against the shield. And then you know that not only you were in war, you were surrounded. You ain't heard nothing. A movie called Zulu, who did everything wrong, show all of the regiments in one, all together. But the Zulu fought in a 3-regiment formation: white shield, brown shield, black shield. The white shield regiment made from the hide of white cows. The shield made from the hide of white cows. These were the trainees. Their job was just to hit the enemy and get out of the way, just to let the enemy know the battle had started. The brown shield regiment would come in and finish if they could. But the black shield regiment was the Zulus' elite guard. Once they entered the battlefield, they had to win or die. They never left the battlefield with victory or death, one or the other. They were specially trained, special beer was brewed for them, special women were trained to marry them. That was the only branch of the Zulu war group permitted to marry. So you can see now how men fought to get from one regiment to the other. In days before the war, before battle, Chaka isolated the men from the women. He said that warfare is passion. That's the dispensing of passion, and so is sex. If you lose it in the bedroom, you don't have it for the battlefield. So hold it up for a little while. After the battle, your pleasure. But get the battle over first. So because of the special treatment he gave that group, it was always striving to get into that group. Now, what you have to understand, looking at Clarke's best years, is that his mission was accomplished, is that he was to hold the whites to the coast and not let them come inland. And he did that. And whites could not come inland without his permission. And when certain Zulu ceremonies took place, he did not give them permission at all. He was the master. And had he lived, there had been no South African situation, because there had been no whites there. It wasn't under control of blacks. All right, admittedly he was a dictator. Admittedly he was ruthless. But had he succeeded, even killed 50,000 more Africans, he could have saved 5 million. Now, if you're part of the statistic that might have to go, I'm sure you're not interested. But that is a fact. Whites were weak enough to be defeated then, and he had a chance. All he had to do is to unify Southern African blacks, and Clarke never fought the whites. Another fallacy a lot of people don't seem to be able to deal with. Clarke fought other blacks in order to bring them into a Zulu federation to save Southern Africa from European domination. His best years were the years, now, when Ding Isweyo came home from the course, and 2 of them revolutionized Zulu warfare, Clarke's father died. Ding Isweyo installed Clarke as king of the Zulus. When Ding Isweyo died and Jobe died, Clarke combined the Mtiwas with the regular Zulus. In the next 9 years, he was the most powerful force in all Southern Africa. He built the Zulu Empire during that period. He would move to the east, he would move to the west, conquering and consolidating. And many people, many groups that did not want to fight him joined him. One was another B group called the Borolongs. Their main king had died, and they were under weak leadership. And they stayed with Clarke until they found a strong king named Morake. Now, with the Borolongs working with him, with all the branches of the Zulus working with him, he would move further to the south and further to the west. 2/3 of South Africa under his control. Disciplined the absolute best. Many times the Zulu would trot 50 miles a day and back just to keep in shape. At his best, he was the supreme leader of Southern Africa. He faced the people still existing in South Africa. He was never physically defeated. But when he faced the people called the Swazis, the Swazis wouldn't fight him. The Swazis fought from ambush, didn't have shields of any consequence. Long, hard sticks. They would sneak up and hit the Zulu on their leg and move out of the way. That's aggravating. Just get on your nerve. Climb up in a tree and jump on your head. Until Clarke declared it a stalemate and spared the Swazis. That's about as close to defeat as he ever got. He said they're crazy. He said that they had a woman ruler, And the Swazis, he thought because a Swazi man rises each morning and goes to the door of his mother and prostrates himself, and he won't rise until she give him permission to rise and said, "Rise, precious fruit of my womb, and go forth for the day." He said, these men must be weaklings. He found different. But he eventually learned better. About 4 years before his death, that's be about 1824, one of his great warriors, known in history as, the British call him Moselekatse, and the Africans who can speak with a click language call him Umzelgeza. You have to say it fast or you say it wrong. Umzelgeza. The British called him the path of fire, path of thunder. He met with Zulus near the edge of the Drakensberg Mountains and said that he has gotten enough of Chaka's killing, and he didn't think the spoils were being equally divided. With his 15,000 Zulus he had under his command, he decided to break away. And when he made this decision, the Zulus gave him the royal salute. Then he shied away from it, almost like Caesar refusing the crown that he knew he wanted. He said the royal salute belongs only to Chaka and his mother, the great elephant, Ninda. To call a woman an elephant in African society, that means she's strong with great character. In this society, you don't do that. Now, they gave him the royal salute again, and he partially accepted their leadership. Then he noticed the old men standing by, frowning. Then he prostrated himself in front of the old man and asked for apologies from his elders. So I've spoken like a child. I have not asked my fathers which way to go. And they said, rise. We agree with you. We will leave Chaka. And they pointed toward the mountains. We will go beyond the mountains, where there are women to be our wives, cattle as plentiful as ants, land as far as the eye can see. We have had enough of Chaka's killing. We will find a new home. Then he turned to the men and said, do you know what you are doing? You cannot go back and claim your wives. You must leave your children, your wives, and everything behind, because if you go back, you give away what's going to happen. Now, history shows that some of them went back one by one and claimed their wives and children anyway. But most of them went without their wives, without the children. They went to a country, part of it is now called Zambia, other part is now called Zimbabwe, later called Southern Rhodesia and Northern Rhodesia, where they found a new home for themselves across this mountain under the leadership of Umzelgeza. Now Chaka searches for a new leader, a new warlord. He looks among the regular Zulus. You don't find one. But among the Borolong people who had joined them, who had moved down from Central Africa with them, he finds a leader in the Brown Regiment, Brown Shield Regiment. I saw his picture when he was 74. And as much as I'm close to 74, the picture frightened the hell out of me. Memboza was standing there with loincloth on, not a gray hair in his head and all the hair on his head, not a break in his complexion at all, not a wrinkle in his face. That's Memboza. He assumes warlordship of the Zulus to fight the Ponderland campaign and other campaigns. All right, now near the end of Clarke's life, he's growing weary, not only of warfare, but of some other things. Because the Zulus are patrilineal. This is one of the few African people who are patrilineal. The lineage come down through the male. He has sent most of his sons away, all of them really, because he feared that one day they may come and dethrone him. His mother, Ninda, wanting a grandchild to pamper, takes this last son, has a little village built where she can go and pamper and dawdle over her grandchild like grandmothers want to do, do the world over. Clarke discovers this and is angry with her. But contrary to all the literature, they say he struck his mother and she died. There's not one iota of proof in it, and I went all the way to Ireland to find the diary of the white man who was with Clarke during his death, during her death. Clarke began to lose interest in the dance because Clarke was a great culture figure and a great dancer. I'm going to see, you see, more and more you see what's left out of the film. He was a great dancer. He created a Zulu dance that is tantamount to close order drill. He created a dance that was so universal, we make a game out of it called statues, a frieze, that came from a form of Zulu warfare. Now, when he began to lose interest in the dance and people began to dance in front of him badly, just to see if he would push them out of the ring and show them how to do it, they knew that something was happening to his mind. And then there's an event, it's recorded in the history of the Jews of South Africa. My man named Herman something. I have the book and I have the treaty. So if anybody want to argue the point, I've got all the evidence. 2 months before his death, he signed a treaty granting a piece of land in Zulu land for the settlement of the Jews. I've got the treaty, I got his signature, and the date. And yet most historians say that he was insane during the months of his life. He obviously was not. That was a very tight treaty, because if it was so tight, if the Jews let any of the enemies of the Zulus move over the land, they would lose the land. And if the land was ever used as a haven for the enemies of the Zulus, they would lose the land. It was a tight treaty. No insane man can think that way. So, sometime near the middle of 1828, he had been accustomed to occasionally going on a hunt with an Irishman named Henry Louis Fan. And he liked Fan because Fan could cook up something that Fan called Irish stew. And Clarke took a liking to it, you know. And, well, the Irish had no colonies, so he had no reason to fear this white man, you know. Had no colonies, had no armies, no navies, you know. So he let him in. While on a hunt, a runner came to him to announce that Nanda, his mother, had passed. He was 60 miles away from Zulu land at the time. He went on back to bury his mother. And I know this might sound gruesome to you in your Western mind, but one of the great funerals in Africa, Clarke decreed that 15,000 men would guard her grave for a year. And they did. He ordered the whole nation into mourning. If anybody showed any form of gaiety, happiness, or laughter, they got punished. He maimed the cows so the cows could also mourn for the passing of Nanda. He said that there'll be no crops planted for a year. The people said they could take that, so they did. He forbids certain other things. Then he said, no cohabitation for a year. Then the old ladies took over. He said, our king is crazy. He has forbidden life itself. We will not survive as a Zulu nation unless we bring forth life into the world. Here is a patrilineal society, a male-dominated society. The women, the old women of the council ordered his ceremonial death, not his assassination, his ceremonial death for the good of the Zulus. They said, he is royal, only royal hands shall touch him. So they chose his two half-brothers to do the job. And when they went into his tent, he would say, you think that by killing me, you will be king. You will be the bondsman and the slave. Whites are waiting like ants to take over this country. Then in the second cry, he reminded them that you have called me many things, saint, tyrant, God, and devil. To some extent, I am all of these things, but I am something else you need to remember. I'm the greatest hope you have for freedom from European rule in this century. In the last blow, he looked at them with pity and said, oh, what have I done to you, sons of my fathers? Now Clarke is gone. Zulu land is looking for a new king. They find the king among his assassins, Dingang. That was one of the boys born when Nanda went back to live among the Mtiwas, came back to visit Zulu land, and some of the other wives said, the shame is gone, now we have sons. That was one of the sons, now grown. Now, Dingang takes over. Now the fight between the whites have started, not with Clarke, but with Dingang. Now the British push the Boers, and the Boers push the Zulus, and the Zulus push back. The Boers want to find a separate republic on the other side of the Vel River or the Orange River that they wanted to call Transvaal. They want to get away from British taxes and British rule. And so they're trying to move inland. Dingang stops them twice, destroys their wagons and their horses. The third time they were about to be defeated, at the edge of that river, the British realized that if any whites are defeated, they may be next. Though the British hated the guts of the Zulus, the British came to their defense. They would meet Dingong at that river. The battle was so fierce and so many butchered bodies flowed down that river. The Africans called it the Blood River. The Battle of Blood River was one of the decisive battles for the African to hold on to Southern Africa. Finally, the battle was lost. Dingong was driven into exile. 1838, he dies in 1840. Now coming to power, a Zulu of the British choosing. You have to understand something about Zulu character. They never produce half men. Their men are whole men. Their puppets are puppets all the way. The Zulu puppet Mpande would rule the Zulus for 32 years, rule or misrule. The Zulu war machine has fallen apart. Mpande is fat and sloppy. He does not marry the women assigned from the family designated to train women to marry into the king's household. He marries into the common women because he can discard them easily. He's a fat, beer-drinking, liquor-lapping slob. He's overweight, couldn't get out of the way of nothing. He is so naive, and the British wrote out his death warrant. And because he believed so much in the British, he signed it. So all right now, approaching 1870, he is becoming unpopular with the Zulus. He has produced a strong son who is now a favorite among the Zulus. The son is Cetewayo. In 2 years, so much support is rallied around Cetewayo that he dethrones his father and becomes king of the Zulus. Cetewayo began to punish Zulus for being fat and sloppy, starts the Zulu war machine again, sets out to train the Zulu army again, sets out to avenge the reducing of his father to the status of a puppet. He is planning now the war against the British. It took him 4 years to get it all together. More than 4 years. He did not fight the battle until 1879. He knew the missionaries helped reduce his father to puppetry. So he's going to attack a missionary station, Roki's Draft. Now coming back into Zulu land, the Borlong warriors, these related Zulus who had previously fought with Chaka. Now the new leader is coming. Mambosa is old now. Well, I can't say he's old because he's near the age I am now, so I don't think I'm old. So the moderately young Mambosa, 74 years old, looking like a man of 30, comes back to offer help. But the condition is that you give his son a command assignment. His son gets the job of leading the troops in the attack on Rockers Drive, the British missionary station. If you see a film on the late show called Zulu, that's what the film is centered around, that attack. There wasn't about 96 British. The African killed about 200. At the end of the film, there's still 96. Mamboza goes to help Cetewayo plan the big battle. Because this battle is, one battle is a rehearsal for the other battle at San Helena. This battle was so perfect. A few years ago, a publisher wanted to commission writers to write books about the greatest battles in history. The first book was written about at San Helena, the Battle of San Helena. Now, after the missionary fight, this would lure the British into the camp to face Cetewayo. And he pulled back and let them walk right into his trap. Mounted on this side, mounted on that side, the sea at the back, and facing it was Cetewayo on a horse, just looking at them for 3 days. Just looking at them, scrambling. They can't get out, they can't get in. Nobody can get out, nobody can get in. Finally, he gave the signal for the battle to start. Damn near everybody down there got killed, including Jerome Napoleon. Churchill wrote about this in a book called A Roving Commissioner. Churchill wrote exceptionally well in the years when he wasn't a cigar-smoking, senile drunk. He handled the English language. Churchill was a good writer. His other book on the war in the Sudan called The River War, I call it the greatest piece of war reporting since Caesar came home from Gaul. He's a man with great talent. When he went to Eton, he couldn't learn French, couldn't learn German. They said, I suppose you just concentrate on the English language. Just learn that and we'll be satisfied. He's a rich boy, so you don't tell them too much of what to do. He learned the English language well. So he was a reporter in his early days, so he wrote 2 books on his reporting in Africa. One, The River War, about the battle, the retake to Sudan. One about the war in southern Africa called A Roving Commissioner. And he's the one that mentions the fact that Jerome Napoleon was killed in this battle, that these Africans had changed the whole structure of the British Empire. Now, Cetewayo would make a mistake. Same mistake Nkrumah made. He left Africa at the wrong time. Had Nkrumah stayed in Ghana, nobody would have been able to overthrow him. He could have rallied the people. Nobody would have been able to overthrow him. Cetewayo went to London. Queen Victoria received him. The war wasn't too popular in England. British tailors vied for the honor of making him a British suit. And they did. And there's pictures of him in this British suit. Big, fat, tall Zulu, Cetewayo, looking utterly ridiculous in a British suit and a top hat. The main thing is that when he got back home, the British had split his country into 13 different parts, and he was only king of one part. Finally, they would drive him into exile and into suicide. Now the British would breathe easily and said, at last the Zulu has been broken. They had spoken prematurely. They had forgotten that second Zulu Empire. Now under the son of Cetewayo, Lobengula. Lobengula was blocking the path of the British trying to take over mining concessions in this area. An Englishman named Cecil John Rhodes, with consumption of TB, was told if you stayed in England, you might live 6 months. In Africa, you might live 2 years. Went to Africa, that good African climate cured him, and he lived for years, stole so much money, finagled so much money, betrayed so much people, they're still trying to count his money. If you understood that, no black man would ever accept a Rhodes Scholarship. All that's blood money. He wanted now to take over the area of the Second Zulu Empire, Matabele land and Mashono land. The people in what is now Zimbabwe are Shonos mixed with Zulus. Remember the 15,000 Zulus who went there, mostly without wives? They married Shona women. So there's no great division between them. They're all relatives. But the main thing is that when Cecil Rhodes tried to take over this country, he tried to provoke a fight with Lobengula. Cecil Rhodes wanted to build a communication system from Cape to Cairo, a good idea for Africa's purpose, but he wanted to build it for colonial purpose. He accused one of the vassal states under the under the Shona people, accused them of taking wire from the communication system and asked that they be punished. And when they were punished, he asked the British Empire to punish the king because he had punished the people too severely. He faked the war using British freebooters, and all that salary was what they could take from the Africans. When they saw the gold bracelets on the African women, they didn't ask to give them to me, they just cut off their arms and took them. So we ain't got nothing to be kind to anybody about but ourselves. This war led to the exiling of Lobengula. His followers followed him into exile. Finally, he told them to go back and make peace with Cecil Rhodes and save their families. In the beautiful poetry that Africans talk sometimes, he said, "Go sweetly, go in peace. There's nothing else I can do for you." They've got another fight, but they've spoken prematurely one more time. After the Boer War, some Zulus served as wagon masters and quartermasters and supplies in the British Army. The British said that they would remit their taxes. Instead of remitting their taxes, the British doubled their taxes. Now this would start and provoke the last Zulu War in Natal and other places. This war was partly led by a young Zulu king, Bambata, and an old Zulu, Sigananda. When Bambata goes to Sigananda and asks for help, Sigananda is 95 years old now. Sigananda is the oral historian of the Zulus. He was body servant to Chaka. He was in the army that guarded the grave of Nanda. He went up, when the Zulus wasn't fighting, he went up in the Congo and fought with a dissident king called Tam Tam Anna. He came back and he saw the Zulus sitting around pitting themselves, and he cursed them out and said, there's no blood on your sword. The imperialists have violated your women, have taken your land. Are you sure you are Zulus or old women waiting to be buried? Then he started his own private war, then went to jail. Now he's back in Zulu land and out of jail again. He's head of a small group called the Kubes. He's known as Sigananda of the Kubes, or Sigananda Kube. Now, when Bambaataa goes to him and asks for help, based on the fact of what help Bambaataa's father had rendered to him, this angers the old man. He said, I helped your father because he was a Zulu and I'm a Zulu. I'm not going to pay this tax. The British want to charge $75 a month for having a dog. He lacks dogs and his sons. He ain't going to pay tax on either one of them. Bambaataa was called a horse thief because every time he wanted a horse, he'd take a horse from the British. Every time he wanted cattle, take cattle from the British. So you ain't bring no horses, he ain't bring no cattle here. They all belong to me. So when he wants one, he just takes one. So the British looking for him. He now goes to Dinizulu, the last son of Cetewayo. Dinizulu said, I don't want any part of this war. I've had enough of the British jails, enough of war. Then he speaks in a loud, secretive, and yet loud enough to be heard across the room. He said that while I want no part of this war, I've had enough of fighting, enough of jails. If there's anyone in the sound of my voice who wants to help this young man, my eyes did not see his form disappear. My ears did not hear his footsteps as he departed. Standing by is the last of the great Zulu warlords and war planners, Sinjani. He goes now to help Bambaataa plan that last Zulu war. And when he go back to Natal, find out what the old man has done, the old man has started his war already. He ain't waiting for these young people to get back. He started the war already. He would fight for 9 months. Finally, the British, Bambaataa would go to the grave of Cetewayo to pay his respects, as is the custom. Any time you're making great decisions in Africa, you go to the grave of your elders or go to your elders. The British were supposed to have cut him down on the way from the grave. His wife refused to go into mourning. If the British knew enough about Zulu custom, they would have known that Bambaataa was not dead. His wife said his spirit will come back and lead the Zulu people. He'd escaped. He had a dummy on one horse, and he was on another. And he didn't ride as a customary white horse that day. He was a strategist too. The British killed his dummy, his double. Cut off the head and displayed it among the Zulus. And all right, this is a lesson for you. You better stop this revolt. It stopped the revolt, all right, but it did not send the wife into mourning, because Zulu wives, after the husband died, supposed to mourn the rest of their life. But this didn't signal the British the fact that Bambaataa was not dead. A man named Benny's doing some work on Dinizulu discovered that Bambaataa escaped and lived in an obscure village in South Africa until 1926, where he died of natural causes in old age. Now, in summation, Zulus have played a major role in the transformation of South Africa. That was the Zulus in the building of the ANC, a great Zulu in the building of the South African Communist Party. His name was Champion. And when someone asked him in the choice between the party and your people, what choice would you make? He said, I will choose my people every time. And when the party asked me, propagated the concept of separate states, the whole homeland concept is now practiced in South Africa, was taken originally from a plan laid out by the South African Communist Party. They may not have known what was going to happen to it, but they designed it first, the so-called separate states for different African groups. When they asked Champion about separate states and in South Africa with different groups, he said, of course, all of it belonged to we Zulus, so I'll take it all. The party expelled him for being nationalist. And he did not. And when the white head of the party, A.E. Bunting, went to Russia with a delegate, all white, Stalin took him to task. Stalin wouldn't even shake his hand. How are we going to unify? How are we going to have a great party in South Africa? You haven't even got a single African delegate. The next time he went to Russia, he took Champion. Tall Zulu, 6'7", I mean just a magnificent statue of a man. He only died about 7 years ago. He was 97. Another Zulu taken with South African acceptance, taken with his acceptance by the Boers, went to a university called Witwatersrand. And because this was a British-run Boer university. You have to understand one thing about the Boers that I should have said earlier. They are Calvinists. And the Calvinist creed is that they are designated by God to look over all lesser breeds. And they don't feel guilty about what they're doing in South Africa because they assume that the African is of lesser breed. Now you would wonder, why would anybody belong to the Dutch Reformed Church? And yet you got blacks in the Dutch Reformed Church. You got blacks fighting to join the Mormon Church, and they say we don't have souls. We can't be priests. We can't be anything. Why do we have to belong to? Well, anyway, that's another lecture. Champion continued his course of nationalism. Many times when this course did not go well later on, some Zulus became conservative, and some of them are conservative to this day. But the Zulus continued their fight on a different plane. When Mahatma Gandhi was in South Africa, he started fight to unify everybody except the blacks. United Nations League, Natives League, United Colors League. If King understood Mahatma Gandhi, King would have never said he's a follower of Mahatma Gandhi. That's still another lecture. The Zulu War of 1906 was the last of the wars. This war, the war against the whites, had started with the Cochon Sand people, later called Hottentots and Bushmen. They fought 11 wars against the Boers, called Kaffa Wars. Gave a splendid account of themselves. One group was almost destroyed. but they did give a good account of themselves. This before the Zulu Wars. The Zulu Wars of consolidation, then the Zulu Wars of resistance. Clarke was fighting the Zulu Wars of consolidation, trying to bring all Africans together to save them from the domination of the whites. Dingang started the Zulu Wars of resistance. You must be very clear on these wars. And as a result of the Zulu Wars of resistance, the British tightened things in South Africa. Or after 1906, the stringent laws, the beginning of past laws, were so hard on people in South Africa. The trade union movement, the white trade union movement in South Africa began to bar Africans, still do. Now the Africans had to take on a new organizational structure. A great Zulu, John L. Dubé, the grand uncle of the Ernest Fred Dubé, who's having the problem at Stony Brook. At Witwatersrand, this Dutch university, he now with frock tails on and coat and a bowler hat and in the summertime, looking like a fool. And he was so taken by this white acceptance, he wrote a scurrilous book called The Black Man is His Own Worst Enemy. Came and studied at Oberlin for a little while. Finally someone talked some sense in his head. And to his everlasting credit, he spent the rest of his natural life setting the record straight and building. It was John L. Dubé, also of Zulu descent, that began to build the ANC and branches of the ANC in every part of South Africa. The foundation builder of the ANC was this Zulu, John L. Dubé. And once that, after his passing, a great Bantu editor, John Tingo Jabevu, began to build. And a young man from Nyasaland came down into South Africa, began to build a great trade union movement. And this frightened the whites, especially the white laborers, to the point where they had to turn against him. He made a mistake, asked Ramsay MacDonald of London to send people from the British Labour Party to help him administer his union. Ramsay MacDonald used this as an excuse to dump all the sorehead communists out of the movement, fighting among themselves, to go in South Africa and fight among themselves and wrecking a black union. And they did. They wrecked the union and almost destroyed its founder, Clement Kadele. Clement Kadele turned to the World Trade Union movement, got some help, but got his best help from A. Philip Randolph. Got published in A. Philip Randolph's paper, The Old Messenger. And if you read the old files of the Messenger, read a long article by Clement Kadele on the growth of South African trade union movement. We have just begun to do our research. Now we have gone hurriedly over a large body of information and trying to set straight some misconceptions of one of the finest military people in all Southern Africa. The Zulus seem confused today and some seem conservative. And there's too much fighting between one in the other. But there was a time the Zulu projected the possibility of Africans being the military masters of Africa, being the masters of that destiny and controlling it to the point where there would be no debate about what white people come in or out, because those who came in would have to come under African rule, and those who could not take African rule would have to go. And what they were projecting is what Africa had before, the concept of the nation state. They were pointing the same kind of direction that Booker T. Washington pointed to, Du Bois pointed to, Marcus Garvey pointed to. The true container for a people's culture, the true container for a people's hopes, the true container for a people's growth and their dreams and their future is a nation state where they control everything. And other people can come in the state and can live in the state if they're willing to live on terms laid down by that people. They pointed to what we will have to do if we would ever be a whole people other than protracted beggars begging for entry into other people's houses. All the Zulu people were saying in their wars, it's the same thing Washington was saying, same thing Du Bois was saying, same thing Garvey was saying. If your soul is ever going to be peaceful, if your freedom is ever going to be secure, build your own house. For Southern Africa in the 20th century, that'd be March the 2nd. By then, I will make up a basic reading list about the Zulu people and about Southern Africa in the 20th century. I will leave it here at the church for reproduction and distribution as they see fit, so that you will have before you the basic information about this subject. And you can read for yourself and draw conclusions for yourself. I don't know what else I can do. I know that sometime in March I have to have, the one thing I've been trying to avoid is an eye operation. And on one eye, I'm going to try one at a time. I ain't going to gamble on losing both of them. If that's successful, then I might try the other one. I ain't no fool now. I want to see as long as I can. All right, you can start. Yes, sir. Yeah. I'd like your opinion of the latest Zulu chief. Now, Buthelezi started out to be a strategist. In fact, I met him earlier when he said that he was going to accept the homeland concept. He's going to accept it as face value, and he's going to see how much sovereignty they're going to permit him to have. And so he even said he's going to invite me to come over and help to set up the teaching, the educational system. He hadn't spoken to me about it since. I must have seen him 6 times since then. But I think he's now a rather conservative puppet. No appreciable value to African people anymore. He's a compromise, but an unnecessary compromise. He could rally and solidify the Zulu people if he would. But he is, I don't see why he contributes anything in a forward way. He's a container, and he caters to white conservatism and containment and Zulu conservatism. I don't see him as having anything remotely resembling a revolutionary fervor. I regret this because I happen to know Buthelezi personally, and I happen to talk to him nearly every time he comes to the United States. The last time I talked to him, it was in the Armory right here in Brooklyn. We had a long discussion. I came all the way over to make a special point of it, you know, of seeing if I could dialogue with him.
Yes, so Dr. Clarke, is there any study you did about the amount of weapons that America supplied to the Boers or to the British, like the Gatling gun and the other weapons during that time of the war against the Zulus?
Well, I know what the amount I do not know about, but I know that America has consistently supplied the weaponry they needed, both to the British and the Boers, and that South Africa now has atomic weaponry supplied by the United States through Israel. And that the United States really have no interest at all in South African freedom.
Thank you. Dr. Clarke, the point that the film is making about Shaka being introducing killing into warfare, could you elaborate on that?
Introducing killing?
They said that prior to him that they would fight, but they would kill each other. War games. Yeah.
Well, Chaka had a different territory and a different weaponry. While this is basically true in certain areas, but you know, in big battles in African wars, sometimes if they had 12 casualties, that was a big battle and a big war. Africans had a way of spying, you know, and sometimes it's almost like a practice campaign, but it wasn't actual killing in some cases. He did not introduce killing. There was killing in African wars before Chaka, but it was not massive killing. Chaka's wars probably had the largest amount of casualties in any single African against African war in Africa. I have never tried to cover up this fact, but Chaka's mission is still a mission worthy of pursuit. And I think the whites who interpret this interpret it wrongly. He is not the fact he introduced killing, but this is the first time killing on that proportion has been in an African wars. There have been wars between African and African, but then some wars between African and African starts at sunset, and when it gets dark, if you want to go home, you go home. Nobody didn't even notice you're going. Africans have been very humane in combat, but they have not tried to fight any people into total destruction. Never.
Can you throw some light to this stuff? Can you say, let us know which one of the Zulu chiefs has received the Nobel Peace Prize by the British?
No, he didn't receive it. The Nobel Peace Prize is not given by the British. It's given by the Academy in Sweden. That's Chief Nathule. Huh? Nathule. Chief Albert Nathule.
I heard recently that the Japanese were divesting in South Africa, since everybody, well, mostly American corporations have pulled out. Is that true?
I hope it's true, but honorary white people sometimes are as devious as white people in business deals. And the Japanese in South Africa declared honorary whites. If the Japanese pulled out, it would be a great blow, it will help a lot in the fight toward freedom. If the Japanese were wise, they would understand that there would be no finer market in the world than a free, well-functioning African continent under its own steam, mastering itself. Because ultimately Africans not only going to assemble cars, ultimately they're going to make cars from scratch. They have the engineers and they have the material right within Africa. And Japan is giving out of said raw material that Africa has in plentiful supply. So if they were wise, the Japanese would strike up a partnership, not just with South Africa, but with African nations in general.
So, one more question, please. We as Afro-Americans, I know we spend a lot of money in this country. Are we hurting our brothers and sisters in Africa by spending so much money in the commercial market?
We're not hurting them by spending so much money. We're hurting them by the way we are spending it without giving it direction. And actually, we can help the Africans because Africa needs so many things. We could buy for the Africans at certain prices and get it to the Africans so that the Africans will cut down on his outlay of money. But we're both going to have to trust each other a little more than we do right now.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Clarke, can you speak a little bit on the origins of the Pan-African Congress of Azania and people like David Sebeko?
Well, the Pan-African Congress of Azania was a young group that broke from the ANC because the ANC was moving too slow, and the ANC was like the NACP, a little on the integrationalist side. The Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania said African land for African people, not we share. My country, my land. And they really did not believe in a whole lot of integration that was nothing but white rule in the name of integration. No, David was no different from his party, and I knew him personally. And he was the best theoretician they had in their last, 10 years. His death was a setback not just for the Pan-African Congress, it was a setback for African liberation. I have some misgivings about the ANC and some of their supporters. I think they're supporting ANC so that if ANC ever came to power, they could control ANC. One was more nationalist. Pan-African Congress was more nationalist. And ANC is more left universalist. Whatever that means. Yes, sir. Yeah.
Through historical documentation, I'm not an advocate of history, interpreter of history, but through historical documentation, everything that's happened to the black man through violence and certain reasons. And even in the interpretation of the history, you find that even when we interpret the history, we find that the only solution is violence. I would like to know, since history has been tampered with, presumably, actually it must have been tampered with because the devil tells the truth. But why, if the history has been tampered with, how can we, let's say, find peace by interpreting the history without really analyzing the nature of the interpretation? I deal with logic. I say, logically speaking, there's no such thing as a white man being able to help us in no form or fashion. I live in that manner. But see, I don't hate the person because of this, because I don't hate snakes. But I do believe that since we have to develop some sum of logic that will make us understand the historical documentation that's being taught to us. And the things that are being taught to us, these are still anything but violence in our solution. I want to know, is there a peaceful solution for our problems? You know, true interpretation of history, because from listening to you, I feel there's some peaceful solution, but I can't see it because of the violence that exists in society.
There's a peaceful solution to the interpretation of history, but there is not a peaceful solution to the interpretation and the obtaining of liberation.